Hi guys, good morning. It's Jenn here, your host with P40 Ministries podcast. Today we are in Genesis chapter 10 because we just finished Genesis 9 on Friday. And if you didn't listen to that one, go back and listen to it now just to give yourself a little bit more insight as to what is happening in Genesis chapter 10, because now we are going to be discussing the descendants of Noah. And I will be reading verses 1 through 20 today. So it's going to be quite a mouthful. And I got to be honest with you guys, there's a lot of names in this portion that I just am not going to be able to pronounce correctly. And I hope I get pretty close though, so we'll see. And you'll hear what I mean once I start reading, because it's kind of crazy. So I'm going to be reading out of the NLT version of the Bible today, and I'm going to start in Genesis 10, verse 1. This is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. Many children were born to them after the great flood. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The descendants of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Rodanam. Their descendants became the seafaring peoples that spread out to various lands, each identified by its own language, clan, and national identity. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka. The descendants of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first historic warrior on the earth. Since he was the greatest hunter in the whole world, his name became proverbial. People would say, "This man is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the world." He built his kingdom in the land of Babylonia, with the cities of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there he expanded his territory to Assyria, building the cities of Nineveh, Rehoboth-ur, Calah, and Resen, the great city located between Nineveh and Calah. Mizraim was the ancestor of the Ludites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtuhites, Pathrusites, Chalcihites, and the Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, the ancestor of the Sidonites. Canaan was also the ancestor of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites, Arvites, Zemarites, and Hamathalites. The Canaanite clans eventually spread out, and the territory of Canaan extended from Sidon in the north to Gerar and Gaza in the south, and east as far as Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim near Lasha. These were the descendants of Ham, identified by clan, language, territory, and national identity. So like I said, that was quite a mouthful for me. And I don't know if I got all those names pronounced correctly, but I'm only going to be talking about the two sons of Noah today, Japheth and Ham, and we'll leave Shem for a different time. But Moses, the author of Genesis, gives some insight as to what is happening with Japheth and Ham and who their descendants are. So Japheth does not have a lot of information on him. It basically says that their descendants were the seafaring peoples. And this would have been after the Tower of Babel, which we have not learned about yet. We did not learn about the Tower of Babel, which we will soon. But Moses, when he is talking about Japheth's descendants, he says here that these people were basically colonizers. They went out and they were seafarers and they colonized all over the earth, and they each had their own languages, clans, and national identities. So like I said, this would have been after the Tower of Babel, because at this point in time, God had not developed many languages. There was just one that everybody was speaking. And it wasn't until after the Tower of Babel that God confused the languages and made everybody speak their own languages so that they would disperse all over the earth. And that's what Japheth's descendants did. They dispersed all over the earth, and they were seafarers. Now, as far as Noah's other son, Ham, his descendants were a little bit different. And I'm going to talk about the Nephilites one more time because, like I said, I'm obsessed with them and I think they are super fascinating. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 6. which is where we were talking about the Nephilites before several episodes ago. And in Genesis 6, verse 4, it talks about the Nephilite people before God caused the great flood. And like I was saying in that episode, Nephilites were people of fallen angels. So when the fallen angels were sleeping with the women, they were producing these Nephilite children who were basically these huge giants. And it says in verse 4 of Genesis chapter 6, "In those days and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times." So these Nephilites were infamous, strong, giant people. And in the beginning of verse 4, it says, "In those days and for some time after," meaning after the flood, Nephilites still existed on the earth. And that is because if we go back to Genesis 10, where we were just at, many people believe that Ham's wife was a Nephilite woman. So she would have been a giant. And that is why Ham's descendants are infamous and notorious and strong hunters, because it talks here about Nimrod, who is one of Ham's descendants. And Nimrod, in verse 8, was one of the first, he was the first historic warrior on the earth. And he was such a great hunter and such a great warrior that his name became proverbial at the time. And people were saying, like, oh, this guy is like Nimrod, the greatest hunter in the entire world. And Nimrod went out and expanded his territory, and he built these huge kingdoms and these ancient cities that we know about, such as Babylon and Calna and Kala and Nineveh. We've heard of some of those. And these were ancient cities that were very famous at the time for being these grand cities. And this Nimrod guy was the one who went out and did this. And this was one of Ham's descendants. And then it talks about Mizraim, who is one of Ham's other sons. And Mizraim was the father of the Philistines. And if you remember that story in 1 Samuel about little King David going against this huge Philistine giant, you will know that Philistines did have giants in their clan, basically, because David went and fought that Philistine giant. And Philistines were descendants of Ham. So that is just more proof that Ham's wife was probably a Nephilite woman. And then in verse 15 here of Genesis 10, it talks about Canaan. And we know a little bit about Canaan because of what we talked about on Friday's episode, where Canaan was cursed. So Noah cursed Canaan because of what Ham had done. And Canaan produces all these people: the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Hivites. So we know some of these people from other portions of Scripture in the Bible. And we know that these Hittite clans and the Jebusites, these were all enemies of the Jewish people. And the enemies of the Jewish people. And Ham was the one who produced these clans of people that were against what God had put in place, such as the Jewish nation. And they were constantly rising up against the Jewish people. So yes, Canaan was indeed cursed because God was constantly against the Hittites and the Amorites and the Jebusites constantly. I found this portion of Scripture really interesting about the two sons of Noah and everybody that they produced and their descendants. But we're going to talk about Shem on a later date, like I said earlier. But I hope that this was kind of interesting to you guys. I tried to make this history lesson a little bit interesting. I enjoy history, and I like that Moses, the author of Genesis, put this into place because some of these tribes we know about from history to this day. And it's just so interesting to see this in the Bible, this history lesson of where these people came from. And how everything is recorded from the very beginning. So like I said, we'll discuss Shem again on Wednesday. Join me for that, 6:30 a.m. Tomorrow we will be back in Matthew, and we'll be discussing more of the Sermon on the Mount for sure. Go to my Facebook page and like it and share it. And always, as usual, I ask that you have a wonderful rest of your day and happy listening. Bye, everybody.